Transparency International Kenya has launched a report, Rubber Meets the Road, an assessment of the anti-corruption laws and institutions of Kenya, which really assesses the efficacy and the impact of the various anti-corruption laws and the institutions that we have in Kenya. Primarily, what the report has found is that despite a plethora of laws in the country, we have several laws touching on corruption, from the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act, the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Public Officers Ethics Act, and many others. But we still find that the fight against corruption is still weak. And despite all these laws and institutions that have been created and mandated, some by the Constitution, to address corruption, we're still struggling as a country in the fight against corruption. And what this means is that despite the laws and institutions, there's a big challenge in regard to the implementation of the laws and just the effectiveness of these institutions. Part of the challenges include the ambiguities in regard to the various laws. We find that there are overlapping mandates among some of the institutions, and when you have overlapping mandates, it generally means that some of the mandates will not be executed because that is when you even see cases of the buck being passed among the different institutions. We've seen challenges even amongst coordination, looking at even how investigation, prosecution and adjudication of cases has been done. Recovery of assets, there's also been a challenge there, again because of some of the overlapping mandates between these institutions. Another challenge has been the resourcing of some of these institutions. We have a key concern in regard to the funding of some of these institutions. I think what we have seen as a disturbing pattern over the last number of years is the continued defunding of some of our state institutions, our constitutional commissions, in the effect that despite the mandate that have been given by the constitutions, they are unable to implement because they simply don't have enough resources, from financial resources to technical resources to the human resources that are necessary for them to be able to fully implement and execute their mandate. So that has been a challenge. And one of the recommendations that we have made is that we really now need to look at the issue of resourcing of these institutions so that they can be more effective. Some of them are responsible, for instance, for asset recovery. Can we, for instance, come up with a mechanism where they are able to have fixed allocations, even in regard to how much they're recovering out there and what they can then be able to retain to enable them to continue their work against corruption. Another challenge that we found is on the issue around the ethics, the ethical framework in following what the Constitution has given us in regard to Chapter 6 of the Constitution. We are still struggling with the question of ethics in this country, looking at the quality and the fitness and the suitability of some of the individuals that are taking up public office, despite the law on leadership and integrity, which has been poorly implemented. And that has been a challenge. And in fact, one of the recommendations we have made is that we really need to look at that particular law so that we can see how we can strengthen the efficacy. And finally, leave the letter and the spirit of the Constitution in regard to leadership and integrity. Actually, one of the findings of this report is the question or challenge of political interference in the implementation of the laws and also in the effectiveness or the execution of the mandates of the critical institutions charged with the fight against corruption. We found that there's been a lot of political interference when you even look at issues around the prosecution of cases, and even in terms of the implementation of the laws. And that's why we have all these laws that exist, but still critical challenges with regard to the implementation, because the political class, the political elite have just not allowed these laws to work. When you look at even how some of these laws have been generated, we've had very, very robust drafts at the point of their initiation, when they were being discussed in Parliament, but by the time they get out of Parliament, by the time they are passed and then enacted, you have very weak versions of it. And that is largely due to the interference of the political class, who have watered down critical bills, such that what we have in terms of bills and what we then get eventually in terms of the law are really, really adulterated. And this has left the fight against corruption very weak. A key example is, for instance, the leadership and integrity law. We had a very strong bill which was based on the chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity, but eventually what came out of Parliament was a very, very weak version that we have been unable to implement more than 13 years later. So that aspect around political interference is a key concern, and even that interference has seen to it that some institutions have not been effective because there's a lot of political meddling, and even in terms of what they are also able to get in terms of resources as passed by Parliament through the budget, is also interfered with. And so that aspect around the political will in the fight against corruption, we don't have the political will to address corruption in this country as we speak. So the strength and effectiveness of the public finance management laws, particularly in terms of addressing the issues, the financial challenges that we see in this country. One of the key phenomena that we have seen here is a case of budgeted corruption, and even the role of Parliament, and even the role of some of our critical independent institutions, the Office of the Controller of Budget and the Office of the Auditor General, to be able to address these questions around budgeted corruption, such that by the time where people are generating budgets, you have already padded them so that there is enough room for you to be able to swindle public resources. But we find that currently our public financial management laws are not sufficient enough to curtail this problem of budgeted corruption, and is also something that we really need to look at to be able to address.